So picture this. You're living in one of the absolute wealthiest, most technologically advanced nations on the entire planet. We're talking thriving coastal cities, a highly educated population, and a booming, incredibly lucrative real estate market. But then, you take a hard look at the data, and you uncover this quite systemic crisis. You find out that your entire national economy is officially less complex than Botswana's. I know, right? No way. In this explainer, we're going to do a complete forensic breakdown of exactly how this happens. We're investigating an economic paradox where a modern nation's innovation isn't just, slowing down, it's being actively strangled by massive, absolutely unchallengeable corporate concentration. Now, what's really interesting here is just how jarring the diagnosis is. When we actually look at the Harvard Economic Complexity Index, we see Australia sitting way down at 105th place. I mean, honestly, it sounds like a glitch in the data, right? Or maybe some kind of weird economic prank. But no, it's a sobering reality. On this index, this incredibly wealthy nation ranks right behind countries like Botswana, Zambia, and Pakistan. So you've got to ask yourself, how does a globally recognized economic powerhouse end up with such a fragile, completely simple economic structure?
Section 1. The Botswana Paradox, Digging and Shufflin'. Instead of true national innovation, the sobering reality here is that the economy relies pretty much entirely on just digging stuff out of the ground and, well, shuffling around mortgages.
Section 2. The Thin Market Trap, Geography as an Excuse. Okay, let's dive into this, because a thin market of 27 million coastal residents actually provides a massive veneer of legitimacy for all this consolidation. To really understand why national innovation has hit such a brick wall, we have to talk about geography. Economists call Australia a thin market. It's this gigantic landmass, but its 27 million residents are basically huddled together in just a few major coastal cities. Naturally, you'd think this creates a situation where competition might be, a bit weaker than in super dense regions like Europe. But here's the catch. This geographic reality acts as this incredibly convenient excuse to justify massive, completely unchecked corporate consolidation. Just look at the retail sector. You've got literally two massive corporations, Coles and Woolworths, controlling 65% of everything the nation eats and drinks. To put that into perspective for a second, the largest grocery chain in the UK holds less than 30% of their market. According to the sources, when two giants dominate your food supply to this extreme degree, they don't actually need to compete on quality or innovation anymore. They just protect their immense size and basically yo-yo prices in these managed cycles, squeezing suppliers and everyday consumers alike, all just to maximize shareholder value. Let's see how this concentration builds when we look up at the aviation sector. The domestic aviation market is honestly even more staggering. Together, Qantas and Virgin carry 94% of all domestic passengers. 94%. It is a near total duopoly. And look, when just two companies control 94% of a market, it completely, absolutely kills the need to innovate. There is literally zero incentive to improve the customer experience or lower fares because, frankly, you, the consumer, have nowhere else to go. Section 3, the mortgage factory problem, the banking clown show. And yeah, it is an absolute clown show, especially when the Big Four have locked on 75% market dominance. Let's just establish a quick baseline here. A functional, healthy banking sector is fundamentally supposed to act as the engine of a productive economy, right? It takes capital and loans it out to a really diverse range of sectors. We're talking agriculture, emerging tech, and small innovative businesses. That is exactly how a country builds economic complexity and resilience. It's how new ideas actually get funded and get off the ground. So the crucial point is that the dominant Big Four banks just aren't doing that anymore. They've essentially stopped acting like traditional banks entirely and devolved into what analysts are calling giant mortgage factories. Look at the numbers. A staggering 70% of their entire operational existence is now dedicated solely to financing home loans. Only a tiny fraction of their capital actually makes it to the productive economy. They've pretty much abandoned the businesses and technological innovators that a modern nation desperately needs to keep growing.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer, terrifying scale of this trap. $12 trillion. That is a 12 with 12 zeros. That's the size of the housing market that these mortgage factories have built. They have effectively sucked all the financial oxygen straight out of the productive economy and just pumped it directly into residential real estate. Think about it. Capital that could have been used to build the next great tech giant or fund a huge manufacturing breakthrough is instead just tied up in brick and mortar.
And because they face zero real competition, these banks get to enjoy some incredibly lucrative perks. We can take on way higher risks, deliver poor customer service, and, well, just get away with it. Even worse, they can charge the public brand new fees without providing literally any additional value or services. I mean, they invent things like a production of documents fee or a security guarantors fee. When four companies control 75% of the market, they know for a fact you can't easily leave, so they just keep inventing clever new ways to extract wealth from you.
Section 4, the death of innovation, strangling the future. Now we're going to look at the measurable, real-world cost this quasi-monopolization is having on the nation's brainpower. The research paints a pretty clear picture of the damage here. Between 2007 and 2021, this heavy monopolization and severely tilted playing field led to the loss of 6,300 employing firms. Just let that sink in. That's 6,300 companies that would have been born, would have hired everyday people, and would have contributed to the economy, but they simply couldn't survive or even launch because the major players had already rigged the game.
And if you're wondering exactly how these giants protect their turf, just look at this perfectly repeatable formula from back in 2010. The government proposed a mining tax that was specifically meant to fund small business support and public infrastructure. So, what happened? In response, the corporate mining industry launched a massive $25 million ad blitz. According to the sources, they aggressively scared the public, successfully ousted the sitting prime minister, and actively destroyed the policy. It was basically a masterclass in using concentrated wealth to completely crush anything that threatened their dominance.
One quote from the sources really perfectly captures the reality of the situation. We are looking at a jarring disconnect where corporate influence buys policy and policy protects the size of the corporation. The politicians become, quite frankly, entirely too scared to challenge these giants. And when the government is afraid to actually enforce competition, national innovation gets completely strangled by the status quo. Section 5, the rise of techno-feudalism, the macro cost. Let's zoom out for a second and look at what happens to a democracy when the rules are literally written by grocery store owners. We call this concept techno-feudalism. The sources argue this is a fundamentally bad business model for a country. Under the system, a nation essentially trades away its entire industrial, innovative future just to secure higher grocery bills, massively expensive housing, and big smiles for corporate shareholders. You aren't really a consumer participating in a free, competitive market anymore. You're actually, practically speaking, a tenant. You're just paying rent to a handful of massive corporate overlords who own the basic platforms of daily life. And as you'd probably guess, the social cost of this is pretty devastating. When citizens start to realize the system is designed for corporations rather than humans, public trust completely collapses. Just look at the data. A decade ago, trust in democracy stood at a robust 86%. Today, it has plummeted to just 41%. Honestly, it makes sense. When the economic rules feel rigged, the democracy itself begins to feel incredibly hollow. Now, understanding these massive macroeconomic shifts is absolutely crucial, which is exactly why sharpening your reasoning skills is so important right now. By learning how to analyze complex data sets without all the corporate noise, you can start to see right through these economic magic tricks. Using interactive learning tools, like the ones offered by Brilliant, actually allows you to master the underlying logic of systems like this. It gives you the clarity to see exactly how these global shifts are really operating behind the scenes. So I'll leave you with this final, absolutely critical question. When you look at the 6,300 missing companies, the insane $12 trillion mortgage trap, and a modern economy sliding all the way down the complexity index, is the Botswana effect just some inevitable destiny of geography? Or are we looking at a national crisis that demands an absolute code-red intervention on competition policy? The data is all right there on the table. The choice of what we do next is what truly matters.